If you don't receive our electronic newsletter, it's called History Happenings. You can sign up with Kayla at the front desk to make sure you get that. We do a lot of programs. We hope that you'll enjoy the exhibit. This is the last day of this exhibit. I don't know where it's going to go next. This is Historic Ithaca is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, so it's really helping them celebrate that. But I know it's going to be up at other places. It might actually be at CSMA next, but don't quote me on that. I know it's going to. I think it might be at the library later on. So some of these images will be up later. There's also, I'm on the board for Historic Ithaca, and they're a sister organization, so there's a card on the desk that talks about some of the other events Historic Ithaca is doing to celebrate 50 years. It looks like there's a group underrepresented in this audience. I was thinking, did we say only women are invited to this? So I tried to find the person that I turned to help me find statistics. I emailed her a couple of days ago, and she said, I'm in Mexico, I can't help you. Because we wanted to give you info on, in the nation, in New York State, and in this region, how many women are in the building trades. So I don't have that. The only thing I found from the Department of Labor says, in Central New York, women are underrepresented in the building trades. But I promise some folks that I'll find those figures when my contact is back from Mexico. And it turns out we don't have info about women builders in our archives, so we want to change that. Hopefully this program can help change that. So if you have material that you think needs to be archived for future researchers, keep that in mind so that this can be a source of information down the road. You can see, if you look behind you, the next exhibit is going to be called Come Play With Us, and it's going to focus on toys. It'll be up for several months, so bring family members back. My understanding is that there will be lots of toys on the floor that children can play with. There's going to be a train set, trains right here, so come play with us. Starting this Friday, actually. First Friday Gallery night will be the opening of that exhibit. So we're delighted that this actually started when Deborah Jones had approached me, actually soon after I started, saying, you know, there might be some material that I have that you might want to archive here at a group of artists. So Deborah's still working on that. But it led to this discussion. We thought this would be a good program to do while this exhibit is up, and because it's March is Women's History Month. So we snuck it in. So we're delighted that Deborah Jones, local artist and author of The Barn Story, you'll see the book over there. How many are familiar with that wonderful little book? It looks like you have a lot of friends here, Deborah.
Thank you so much. She said
Sue Consentini who's the owner of Consentini Construction and the founding member of New Earth Living, and she's in the process of creating a new community on 5 Mile Drive. I forget the name of it. Amabel. So I know you'll be talking about that presumably. And then Maria Klemperer-Johnson, owner and instructor of Hammerstone. Have folks taken courses at Hammerstone? Okay, good. So I believe there's material about Hammerstone on the table over there. Sue, I don't know if you brought...
I didn't bring anything.
Okay.
It's all on the internet.
It's all on the internet, so that's good. So we've asked each to present no more than 15 minutes. And then we want lots of time for Q&A, because I think there's going to be some interesting questions about their experience of women in the building trade. We had an opportunity to talk briefly for planning for this, and I was surprised at some of the things that women still run into in the building trade. So we hope that you'll have some thoughtful questions as we invite them up to be part of the panel after they each present individually. So Deborah, you're going to kick us off.
Thank you all for coming, and I really do appreciate that Rod and the staff are sponsoring this event. There are 3 of us on the panel, and we have very different backgrounds. However, there's one common element, and that is we are or have been, in my case, in the building trades here in the area. I'm going first simply because I'm the elder. And I've been around longer, though Sue's coming along pretty fast. She remembers some things too and can contribute to the history, some history part of it. So I started in building right after graduate school, after receiving an MFA in sculpture from the University of Illinois. I returned home. I hope that this thing is working correctly here. I returned home. I'm a native of Ithaca, by the way. And in graduate school, I had this vision of converting my family barn into a home studio. And so here you have a map of my neighborhood. And this is Perry City Road. There, you don't have to try to read this. I'm going to explain things, so don't be squinting when you read it. So Perry City Road, and as a child growing up, I was surrounded by barns. I played in barns. I worked in barns. So barns have been a part of my life. I still live on Perry City Road in the converted barn. And my experience is presented, as Rod said, in the barn story. Of course, a barn-shaped book, since I'm a sculptor, basically by training. So you can, the legend here on the map, in case you can't make that out, there were 9 barns in my immediate neighborhood, and only 3 of those really are left out of 9. So this is in the early 70s when I returned. Actually, things have changed also. This one, which was in ruins here, the Smith barn, is totally gone. So it's vanished from the landscape. You couldn't tell they just bulldozed everything. You wouldn't be able to tell there was even a barn there. Except there's a beautiful farmhouse across the road. So, but it's part of our heritage. It's important, I think, that these things be saved. The county home, Tompkins County Home, and I think there's going to be a program here, isn't there, on Tompkins County Home?
Eventually, John
Eventually.
is supposed to do that.
They have a wonderful set of barns, and those may be saved. Well, right now, they're in a fairly bad state of repair. So you can see that from the map that things do get lost. This shows you a beautiful little scene here that my grandmother painted, actually, of my aunt's barns. And those are, many of those have fallen now. So I was sort of wondering myself over the years, how it is that I happened to start with this horrendous project. And I think it's because as a kid growing up, growing up in the country, I was just more adventuresome, and also I was into building. As you can see here, I built tree houses, and I also lean-tos in the hedgerows, and also I built straw bale houses in the loft of our barn. And actually, this is probably one of the first straw bale houses in Tompkins County built by a female. I go on record with that. So, and then there's me climbing up there in the loft. And so I approached my parents after grad school, and I explained my vision to them, and they were receptive. And it's amazing the support and trust that they put in this 30-some-year-old woman, just, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to convert this barn. So they deeded me the barn in an acre of land they are since deceased, and hence the little halos over their heads. But I was very appreciative of that because I had strong attachments to that barn. And the other barns in the neighborhood, which here are some of the pictures of them going down, and the only thing that remains is some of the scraps, some of the old heating systems and all. So, very sad that these icons of New York State were losing. So, the family barn was spared that fate. When my parents bought it in 1938, my father, it was in very bad shape. My father worked on it. He converted it in order to have a place for cows and a horse and a pony and all for family. We never made our living off the land. However, we had a lot of livestock. And my father later started Jones's Cider Mill, which is known quite in the area. And we three kids worked in the cider mill, and my dad certainly produced a lot of cider for the area. But as I said, that really preserved the barn. Now, I don't have many before shots of the barn as I saw it coming back from grad school. My parents had actually left the property. They rented out the property because they were the manager and matron of the Tompkins County Home. So they weren't in resident on the property. And the barn sort of started to be neglected and also loaded up with a lot of stuff. So one of the first things that I had to do in restoring or renovating was move the stuff out. So one of the first things to go was the cider press, and you can see that up here in the corner of this picture, the cider press, which is still being used over in Virgil, New York.
Oh, nice.
Which is great. I feel very comforted by that, knowing that I think Hollenbeck or something like that, his family is still using that. So I had to take everything out. I also had to remove a lot of the sheds and other attached items. I went in and I removed a lot of the walls because they didn't follow any sort of old order of the vents in the barn. And let's see here. So basically I cleared everything out and left a shell. Now the barn measures 64 feet 4 inches by 30 feet, so 30 feet wide, 4 inches long. I only took a third of that to renovate. That's what I can manage, a third of that. And as I said, it was in very bad shape when my dad got it. And my dad really didn't have the time or the money to preserve it or bring it back to its historical, accurate structure. And so you can see beams are really sort of supported by 2x6s and things like that. And you can see here scabbed up, beams are scabbed up with braces and all. So that was sort of hard to see, but I tried to keep as close as possible to the interior divisions. And when I started, I didn't have much experience. Well, much experience. No experience. And so what I did have experience with was using a lot of power tools. A lot of power tools. So I went and I was very comfortable really working with some of the power tools and being able to go in there and work in that way. So a lot of the work I did alone because I didn't have money to hire people. Later on, I certainly had help in doing some of the electrical work and plumbing and all, though later I doing some of the installation of sinks and toilets and all. And so this is what one room looks like. You can see sort of the before and then the after image. Now, inspiration did come from my mother, who always wanted to make changes in our home and achieve them by nagging my dad, and also through Connie Saltonstall and Vicki Romanoff, because they were doing their building when I was just starting in on mine. So that was inspiration. I thought, if two women can do that, one woman ought to be able to do this barn. So I needed help. I was not Wonder Woman here, you can see, although Wonder Woman was born about the same time I was. And so I hired Sawtooth Builders. This is where Sue was asking. So here we have Sally Wessels, who's in our audience, who was part of Sawtooth Builders. One of two women, Cindy Dickerson. And so it was great that the men invited the women or encouraged the women to be part of that company and all. So they did building from the ground up, which I had never done. So I hired them to do that. Now I supported myself by doing carpentry work. This is one house that I worked on that Peggy Billings bought under the urging of Rhoda Linton, who's in the audience. They're both in the audience. And this is the William Carmen house. So this is what it looked like, say, 150 years later. So after 150 years of its birth, this is what it looked like when I took it over, renovating with a group of women. And so we had a lot to do, mostly gutting it first, taking everything out, taking the lath and plaster out, and hauling out a lot of other stuff. The building had suffered fires and water damage, so there I am up there on the roof doing stuff and then studding everything up and sheetrocking. So this crew of women, we had a mix of experiences. One of the women in the crew was Mary Shelley. I don't think Mary Shelley's in the audience, but Mary Shelley participated in renovating the Clinton House, and then also did a lot of the carpentry work on now the Billings, the Carmen Billings house. So, as I said, I supported myself doing that. Here we have the drawing by Drew Wheeler of the Carmen house, and then a picture of it, like what it looked like when we were finished. It's very important. This house is amazing in houses like this because it has architectural history involved with it. It has sociological history involved with it in the sense of the Quaker movement. And it also has political history involved with it because it was part of the Underground Railroad. So it's very vital that these structures, I feel, be saved. The last big job I did was putting up, with the help of Maureen Bolton, here, of putting up a cover on the patio for the barn, and it had been a number of years. I was in my 60s when I did this, and things had changed. I had cordless drills and also bifocals. So, you know, it was a different experience. But I enjoyed it, and it was wonderful having a woman help with that. So the barn, it's not a true historically preserved barn. However, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I saved it. It's an example of old English style structure, and it is part of our bar history, our county history, and also a family history. And so, if I ever had to do it again, would I do it? Yes, probably so, even knowing what I know now. So that ends the presentation.
Is that what was said? I can't remember. I think we did. And I'm going to run through those slides.
Yes, you just,
Oh, yeah.
just 10 seconds or so much.
And if you want this one. Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Maria, and I'm the owner of Hammerstone Carpentry for Women, and I also own Hammerstone Builders, which is my contractor company. A women run, and we have a few women carpenters on our crew. One of the questions that I get asked when I tell people that I'm a builder, right off the bat, is, "Oh, wow, how'd you get into that?" And that question always bothers me because I don't think any men who say they're a carpenter get that question. I think that's a question that's reserved for like really unusual and unconventional careers. Like, I don't know, if you're an astronaut or something, people would say, "Oh, wow, how'd you get into that?" And the fact that I get asked that question all the time really speaks to the fact that very few women are doing this work. So really I'm being asked that question because I'm unusual as a woman, as a carpenter, and not because carpentry is really an exceptional or unusual career. But because in this setting we were talking about women carpenters, I think that it is interesting to hear how I got into this work. So that's what I'd like to share with you is how I became a carpenter and how I decided to start Hammerstone Carpentry, where I teach women carpentry skills. And in the background, I don't have an actual presentation, but we're just sliding, or going through a slideshow of some pictures from some of my classes. So I haven't always been a professional builder, but I've always liked to build. As a kid, I played with Legos. I actually, I keep saying that I built things out of Legos, and my mom recently corrected me, and she said, "You didn't actually build anything out of Legos. The Legos actually belonged to my mom." Hobby, and she was really glad that she had kids that she could buy Legos for. But I remember inventing things out of Legos. I had these sort of elaborate contraptions that I was going to build, like back scratchers with moving parts, but I don't think I ever actually built that much out of Legos. But I did do, as I got older, some woodworking with my dad, who was a hobbyist woodworker, and with my grandfather, who also did a lot of woodworking. My grandfather also, he came from Germany. He had these very elaborate stone building blocks that came in flat, so that they had to be pieced back into each flat very precisely, and they came with plans that you could build elaborate cathedrals and monuments from, and every stone had to go in its exact position. It was very German, and when I was old enough and responsible enough, I was allowed to play with those. And so when I was about 10, I remember building things with my grandfather. And then, like a lot of women of my generation, for whom shop class was open to, a lot of women come to my class and say, "Well, I wasn't allowed to take shop," or women who are younger than me say, "Well, there just wasn't shop in my school anymore because we're using those things in the schools." But I'm of a generation where women were allowed, or girls were allowed to take shop class, and there were still those activities in schools. I did woodworking in school, and I also did auto shop, and so I remember having this passion for building and sort of non-traditional work, even as a young kid. In college, when I would come back from college, I would do projects in my dad's wood shop. I'd get plan books and build shaker furniture and stuff like that, and I was pretty much self-taught. I mean, my dad had a little experience and he shared that with me, but a lot of stuff I learned on my own. But it never occurred to me that carpentry was a legitimate career path. In my family, we were sort of expected to go to college, and then once you're in that sort of pipeline, at the end of college, it's like, here are the careers that are laid out for you. You can go, start a high-tech company, or you can go work for a big corporation, or you can go for government or nonprofit work, or go teach or join academia. But blue-collar work was not really an option, and it never really occurred to me, even at that point, even though I knew I loved to build, it never occurred to me that this was a legitimate career path. So I studied computer science in college, and I graduated in the mid-90s, and so of course it made perfect sense for me to move to Seattle and get a job in the .com industry. I left before I vested in any of my stock options, so so that's what I did, and I was not very happy. And so after a couple of years working as a programmer, which, by the way, is another very male-dominated field, although not nearly as bad as carpentry, after a couple of years, I was pretty miserable and I decided to move on. And at that point, that's the first time in my memory where I really think I was considering becoming a builder. And so I was considering either going to graduate school in geology, which was my minor in undergrad, or going to woodworking school in Seattle. And I came through Ithaca. This was before I had even applied to schools. I drove through Ithaca and visited Cornell, their geology graduate program, just to sort of, as an investigation. And then got a position offered to me that, starting that like in just a couple of months. So I visited in October and I was offered a position starting in January. So this sort of just fell in my lap. And so I never really put a lot of critical thought at that point into becoming a builder. So this fell into my lap. I'm very happy that it did because it brought me to it, and I love it here. I'm never going to leave. But I did not stay very long in the geology program. I lasted about a year and a half, and then I just quit. I dropped out. I didn't even get a master's. And it was a very difficult time in my life because I was, it's hard to quit something, especially something with all this cachet and legitimacy. But I was really miserable, and I realized that I'm not really cut out for pure research. And I also realized that the things that drew me to geology were not the things that geology was all about. And so looking back on those two career choices, program and geology, I realized that there's a lot in those two things that I found in carpentry. So the aspect of carpentry that I found in programming was the act of building things. And I had convinced myself for a little while that building things in the virtual world would satisfy me in the same way that building things in the physical world would. But the whole, the culture and the work environment tied up in computer programming was not satisfying in the way it is in building. And I also found that there were a lot of people in that industry who were not doing it from a true passion for what they were doing, but really to make a lot of money. And that's not really true in my current job. So that was what drew me to computer programming, but it wasn't the whole package. And what drew me to geology was field work. So being able to work outside, use my whole body and my mind. But the other part of the package, which was really loving what I was doing and creating something, was really absent in geology. And so when I quit graduate school and I became a builder, I found the work that brought together those two parts of my personality and allowed me to exercise those and just be really happy. So I dropped out of graduate school and I got a job in a cabinet shop just by cold calling a bunch of cabinet shops in the area. I just had interviews at maybe 5 places. I was dating a builder at the time, so I kind of had a little bit of inroads into that industry, but I really just, called a bunch of people up and got offered a job. And I think some of the things that allowed me to do that was the fact that I had this previous experience. And I knew how to use some power tools. I knew how to use a tape measure. I knew how to do things carefully and put things together. I had sort of an understanding of construction. But I didn't have a ton of experience, and everything I learned on the job. And I think that's actually true of most carpenters. I mean, it's not the type of profession where you go and you get, a 2-year education in home building before you become a carpenter. Most people just go and start working for a builder. And I think that is one of the things that keeps it as such a that continues to perpetuate this male-dominated workforce. Because still in our culture, boys are taught how to handle a hammer and how to, the sort of basics of construction. And so then when you reach adulthood and you're looking for a job that can fill in, between your music gigs or whatever it is, it's really easy for guys to go and say, well, I have a little bit of experience and I can pick everything up. But as women, if we aren't taught any of this when we're young, it's hard for us to have the gumption to go ask for a job when we don't know anything. And I think there's a lot of perception among contractors that you don't know anything. So that's a real, the fact that there's no sort of formal educational structure makes it hard to change that gender dynamic. So getting back to my sort of personal trajectory, Ithaca is a very progressive town, And I never faced harassment on the job. Every builder that I worked for was very welcoming. I occasionally had weird things, like the very first job I got, my future employer said, "Oh, I've hired women before, but I have to ask my wife." And that's a story that I've heard from multiple women who have emailed me with their personal stories. So I think that's something that if it happened in any other industry, you would imagine a lawsuit, but it still happens in construction. But the crews that I've worked on have always been super supportive. I've always been treated as an equal. But at a certain point, I just got tired of being the only woman on the job. And I think there was like one stretch in I started working in 2002, so in the 14 years that I've been working, there was one stretch of maybe like 5 months where I worked with another woman. And from then until I actually started hiring women, I've usually been the only woman on the job site. And it gets annoying after a while to just like have that, the energy is always like male dominated. You never see people like yourself. And like I said, the comment that I made at the beginning, where you're always sort of seen as exceptional, while that makes you feel good when people are excited about what you do, it makes you feel good, it also gets a little tiresome after a while. And the thing that bothered me the most was that when I would feel a lot of pressure to not fail as a woman carpenter, because any failure would be yet another tick of proof that women aren't capable of this work. So really, once you step into doing this work, it's like you can't mess up at all, or people are going to be like, see, women don't know how to hammer a nail, or whatever. So there's a lot of pressure not to fail. But when you do succeed, that's not taken as proof that women can do this job. It's just taken as proof that you're an exceptional woman for doing this work. And that gets very frustrating to like have that pressure all the time and then not have your successes resonate out into, to support the rest of women. And what I realize is that the only way that people's perceptions are going to change is if we start seeing lots of women doing this work. That it's not just 1 or 2 or maybe 5 women are in our community, sort of exceptional women in our community doing carpentry, but when you see, 50%, at least 30% representation of women on these jobs. And so that's why I started Hammerstone Carpentry for Women, this organization where I'm teaching carpentry skills to women. Now, when I started the school, I had this idea that like all these women were going to come to my classes and they're going to take a few skills building things and then they're going to go and get jobs in Ithaca, right? Within a couple of years, we'll see women on job sites everywhere. And the truth is that most of the women who come to our classes are hobbyist woodworkers. They want to grow themselves. Oh, sorry, not that one. And they want to be able to tackle their own projects at home. They want to sort of empower themselves. And while I was a little bit disappointed that we weren't getting lots of women stepping right into the trades, at the same time, I think that even these hobbyist woodworkers are helping change the culture, because all these women go home and they're going to do these projects around their houses. Their kids are going to see them. Their neighbors' kids are going to see them. Other people are going to see them actually doing this work, and that's going to change the perceptions of the next generation about whether women do this work or not. So I actually had a very funny conversation with my kids last night, and they said, "Why carpentry just for women?" And I had to explain to them that in most places in our country, women don't do this work. And they said, "But you do." And I said, "Yeah, but for most people, it's very unusual." And so we're working on changing that perception. So now we teach these short form a la carte classes. We teach a 2-day basic skills class where women learn how to use the circular saw, how to measure and mark, the sort of fundamentals of carpentry, and they build a pair of sawhorses, which hopefully encourage them to go out and continue doing carpentry in the future. We offer some other classes, a framing class, some trim classes, and then some like project classes, build a picnic table, build a bookcase. The real work, I think that these classes are getting a large number of people through with basic skills. The real work of getting women into the industry I'm doing through my construction company. So I have 2 young women and one other one who's on hiatus right now, but will be coming back, working as carpenters in the industry. So we're on job sites where we're working alongside other crews, and they're seeing women doing this work. You know, clients are seeing women doing this work. General public is seeing us doing this work, and so that's where I hope the real change will come. Thank you.
So we're not sure if this will allow internet, but we'll try, so go ahead and start.
Yeah, that's it. Hi, my name is Sue Consentini, and my company is Consentini Construction. Consentini Construction has been around for over 20 years, and I've been in the trades for 30 years. My company, Consentini Construction, has built or remodeled over 600 houses in the area. That's how long I've been doing it. I worked with Sally on. So Sally and I worked together at Sawtooth Builders. That's where I started as a laborer. I didn't get into the trades because I built anything. I got into the trades because I loved being outside. And I was an elite athlete. And my boyfriend at the time said, "Why don't you come to work for me?" And I realized when I found out it was outside, and it's like an age again. When I found out it was outside, and I got to work on a thing that was basically like a jungle gym, it was a done deal for me. I got to climb around outside, even in the wintertime. I still loved it. Freezing cold. It was crazy, but it was still awesome to not have to be inside, and I loved it. And I still do. I still love the physicality of it, and I've got arthritis, and I feel sometimes when I go to the job site, like Life of Brian, you know, you can chop off my legs and my just as long as I still have my right arm, you know, to pick up a pneumatic gun. When I started in the trades, there were not pneumatic tools. As a matter of fact, just the other day, unfortunately, I only have male employees, but I got a guy that works for me, big guy. He's hammering subfloor with underlayment nails because my staple gun broke and I had to get it done. And he's swinging really wrong. Like, if you guys come to the Habitat Women Build, I'll teach everybody how to swing a hammer. And he's just like taking his whole body like this, and that's actually not how you swing a hammer. You swing a hammer from here. Because the hammer does the work, because it's weighted properly, right? And it's all from here. That's why if you can identify a carpenter in a second, because if this arm almost is like Popeye. Not anymore, though, because of pneumatic guns. Anyways, he never hardly swung a hammer because pneumatics is all we all use. And I walked over and I go, no, it's like, and I leave him and I showed him how to swing and I walked away and he's smiling. He's like, wow. I said, listen, those nails should go down in 2 hits. And I showed him and I sunk them in 2 hits. And he was like, because he was like banging and banging. I was working in the same room, about to go insane. And I walk over, come on, this is how. And he hit it down in 2 hits and started smiling. I was like, and I thought to myself, because I think probably because of this talk, I thought to myself, that was kind of cool. I just did this old carpenter, but I'm a lady thing. It was just this cognitive little bit of a brain cramp. So yeah, I started as a laborer, and I absolutely sucked. I mean, I was terrible at it. I didn't know the difference between a ball-peen hammer and a set of channel locks. And the guy I worked for would send me to the truck and go get the channel locks. I'd be like, oh, okay. And I'd come back with some wrench and yell at me. Later became my husband for some reason. But anyway, he would scream at me. I would come home almost 3 times a week in tears because I sucked. And I couldn't even visualize like walls and a ceiling. Like, it was so bad, which I think is gender connected. I know it's discrimination, but I couldn't visualize anything. And, but I loved it. I just loved the thing that everybody loves about building, the intrinsic reward. Like, you get done and you're like, damn, I did that. And I had that, like everybody does. That's why we go into the trades. It's definitely not for the money. And I had that, and so and of course just the physicality of it. Just that aspect alone kept me going. And The people that I worked with were great, but I definitely experienced, and I still experience, fairly significant discrimination in my company, Consentini Construction. The discrimination back in the day, when I first started, classic example, I'm up on a roof, working, laying shingles, back in the day when you hand drove with a hammer, and we're putting, I can't believe I'm that old. So now, when I think about it, so you guys can go to my new houses, or go through the gallery. That's boring. This is the house we built years ago. I don't know. Let's go to, is there, go home. Let's see what's it. Go. So this is New Earth Living. This is my company that's building high-performing homes. It's not building, it's really the developer. The Consentini Construction will do the building. Oh, you know what? Go ahead and you should just go to my Facebook gallery. Here. Where are they? Scroll down. Whatever. Let's just get to a house. We just need to have a house. Even though houses are now so different than. Now it's all about the, none of my houses are showing here. There you go. Just stay there. There you go. That's fine. This is the development I'm doing. So I was up on a roof. I had a jog bra on and shorts and my nail bag and everything. And I'm up on a roof. It was just a ranch house, And I'm on some street, rotten, dried, I don't know, I'm nailing away. And a guy and his son walk by. Hand in hand, they walk by. And the kid looks up. He's 7. Looks up on the roof and just stops dead in his tracks because I had a ponytail and a jog. And he looks up at me, and I realized they were looking, and I look down, and he goes, he just has this cramp in his head and goes, "You can't do that." And I go, "I'm doing it." and you could tell that it was just cognitive dissonance. It was just, no, that doesn't happen in the world. And that is the fundamental discrimination that I still get, where people go, well, it can't be a good job. I won't get a good job because it's a woman. There's a thing of if it's a guy and he's 6'4" in Carhartts, I'm gonna get a good job, it's gonna be great. And if it's a woman, how could it possibly be good? Because it just doesn't go together, right? And I don't hold it against, it's just the culture. It's just the oxygen we breathe. And I'm sort of evidentiary of it, in that it was hard for me at first. A lot of this stuff didn't come naturally. And now, by virtue of that, I'm really good. What I do is really good because I had to pay so much attention. And I am a speaker at national conferences. I have written articles for trade magazines. I built state-of-the-art houses now. It's the elite level because I sucked at it. I was really bad. And I really had to pay attention, and I still very much pay attention. I'm one of the few builders in our area who truly engages in continuing education and goes to professional, and actually is a speaker. And I think that's pretty unusual, and I do that because it continues to unfold, this industry. And I want to stay on top of it. So that was one thing. And then I'll never forget another experience that I had. It was I think it was a Saturday. And we got a load of drywall. And this was back when drywall wasn't lightweight. It was heavyweight drywall. And we had a load of 12-footers. And we had a gang walk across the overdig from the excavation. We had to all get it. And the guy delivers the load, walks into the site, sees me and the guy I was working with that day, and goes, "So who's going to unload this? You and your girl Friday?" And he goes, "Actually, yeah." And then, boy, did I jump to the occasion, right? That's exactly what Marie was talking about. Every time I cut a board, I wasn't cutting it for the job. I was cutting for my entire gender. You know what I mean? I'd be seriously, that's exactly the experience, right? You'd be cutting a piece of plywood, and I'd be thinking, if I came off the chalk line, and condemn my entire gender as being capable in this industry, right? And so I'd really be trying to keep it right because I knew. And I humped that drywall to the second floor like a slave. Because I wasn't, and by the end of it, the guy loved me. I didn't have to do anything. he was just so, it's cognitive dissonance. He had like a brain spasm, and then he realized he was dead wrong, right? Because he saw me do it. And that's how it was all the time for me. Anybody who didn't know me would show up on a job site, and you could just see their entire molecules go like this. Yeah, right. And I would see it, because I'm not blind, I could feel it, and I would just go, take my saw and cut something, or go up on the roof and do something, and then they'd be transformed. But they weren't at first. I had to do something. I had to pick up something heavy, or get up on the roof and climb out on the roof, which wasn't a problem because I loved proving them wrong. It was like a game. I had a good time at it. But it did get old, and it didn't work. It's like Maria said. I thought I was going to carve. I was going to transform attitudes, sort of on a much more global basis than I actually was able to impact. So tragically, it had no impact. But it kept me going, and it kept and I remained naive for a long time of the actual gender difficulty. And then later, as a general contractor, I'm a general contractor. I've been that for a long time. I had, you're not going to believe this, and this I think may be somewhat illustrative as well. I went to a job to look at it, to do a sales call, have a conversation, talk about what's possible with these people, and look at their thing, and give them some numbers, and you don't get the job at those times, you just have a conversation. And I thought it was great. I thought I had great ideas for them. I thought we resonated with the life and everything. I get done, and she, even it's a couple days later, and she sends me an email, or she gives me a call, and she goes, "We're not going to hire you." And I go, "Really?" Whatever her name was, Tammy. I thought that it was great. I thought that you got a lot of value. She goes, "Yeah, but my husband, he doesn't want a woman around that's smarter than him." I give her a lot of credit for it. It wasn't just a woman around that's smarter than him. He doesn't want a woman doing work on his home. Yeah. Because your home is kind of like your psyche. You're kind of like, no, she's smarter than me. No. And I feel like the other thing that has happened, I think, for me as a very, very non-traditional, it is a tough industry to be a woman in. I mean, you don't have the mechanical advantage, and you don't have as much testosterone. And I had 2 stress fractures in my arms when I first started as a laborer from just carrying lumber. And I was 160 pounds of sheer muscle. And it still was debilitating because as a laborer, all you do is carry lumber all day and take things up on the roof before we had mechanical things that take things on. I mean, literally, we would carry shingles up on. But now I think what happens is people go, well, she's a woman and they don't do this consciously, but they figure because you're in this non-traditional thing and you've somewhat succeeded, you must think you're all that. You must be kind of like full of it or arrogant in some way, and then they don't call you. I don't get calls, I think, partially because people are like, well, Sue Consentini, she must think she's something else. It's like, I'm just waiting for jobs to come in. I want to do some estimates, And all I want to do is make sure I can make payroll next week, just like every other contractor. That's all that's occurring to me, just like everybody else. But I think that I get that component too, of this untouchable or unapproachableness. Because you must have been really savvy and really willing to overcome massive adversity, so then you don't hire me. So it's like a double whammy. 1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay, well that's what I have to say. No. So that's it, really. And then what I talk about, I think that I would just answer questions. But those are some of the types of discrimination that I actually saw. It's kind of bizarre, and definitely true. And there's this weird phenomenon. So I would just talk about my new company, or my new I'm trying to build communities now, which is very interesting because it's got my building thing and this gender part, because I'm actually fostering community in my communities. And I don't think your average male developer would be so interested in that. And I'm actually very intentionally creating sort of, if you will, social building. I'm physically building these high-performing homes, but I'm also trying to conceive of context that fosters social connection between people. Because I think that's the future. I think relationships are really crucial to resiliency. So, and that's a very sort of gynocentric approach to. I'm done, right?
Well, yeah, because now we'll just do Q&A.
Move that table over to the center.
Oh.
Yeah, that's easy, it's like.
So we really just want, hopefully you have questions, because I think there's things, so Deborah really didn't go into much, maybe some of her experiences as a woman, so there might be some
Discrimination?
questions for Deborah. So who has a question?
Well, I think maybe you're right. Let's hear a little bit, because I mean, you both came against things. So maybe a little bit, because you're a little older and you might have a different sort of take
I didn't
on
want
it.
to dwell on that too much.
Okay.
So when I was in grad school, I learned the use of a lot of power tools. And we didn't have pneumatic. It was the most fully equipped sculpture studio, I think, in the Midwest. So I was one woman, though, in a program of 15 men. So yes, I learned how to deflect a lot of the sexism that was aimed at me. And there was quite a bit. And then when I was building, and it was Robinson and Carpenter back then, if any of you remember, going in there and buying materials, and they would sort of smile or smirk and all. But there were also men who were willing to share their experiences. I mean, they were willing to help out, and offer suggestions. And if I had questions, then I would go to a book, or I would go to someone with experience and ask. And so that was certainly helpful. But I know my parents, they wouldn't say it to me, but I know my parents always got questions. Well, why is little Debbie all 105 pounds of wanting to take on this project or whatever? So, and also one thing I forgot to mention is when I first saw Maria's poster, I was just delighted to see that Carpentry for Women, because back in '73 and '74, there was the feminist studio, feminist art studio here in Ithaca, which we're working on the documentation of that. And Sally Wessels and Cindy Dickinson first started taking carpentry and then went into the trades by taking a carpentry course with me. I offered carpentry courses for women too, so I thought, Rita, yes, bless you. She's taken over. And she didn't know the history that she was.
No, I didn't know the local history at all, but one of the things, so I sort of came into this from a very personal perspective, and I was like, I want my situation to change, so I'm going to do something about it, but didn't really have an understanding of the history of women in the trades. But since doing this work, I've done a little more reading, and one of the things that's really interesting is that there's been a lot of work on this front for 30 or 40 years, but the statistics haven't changed. So the number of women nationally working, or the number of carpenters nationally who are women is 3%, or fewer than 3%. And it has stayed at that number for 30 years. Someone, I can't remember who it was, but someone made a point to me, I think that they were reading a book about the women in the 70s who were getting jobs in unions and putting up with a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
And having a situation, I mean, I faced discrimination, but it's never been overt harassment. And so they were putting up with a bunch of crap. And what kept them going was the idea that they were going to change this industry. And to look back on 30 years, like having done that 30 years ago and realize that it hasn't changed, that's really frustrating. It really sucked to put up with that and And I, looking forward, sometimes when you're running this business, I think like, what for? Is it gonna change this time? And I hope it will, but I just don't know.
Well, the discrimination has changed. You haven't gotten as much as we did. And that's changed, but there's not many women in the industry.
Right. And there's no overt discrimination, but I still do face that, like, not getting jobs. And I've never had someone come out as explicitly and say that it's because, but, a lot of times you lose jobs and there's always some other explanation. But in the aggregate, when you look at, I've lost this job, and I've lost this job, and I've lost this job, the one thing that ties it all together is the fact that I'm a woman.
Well,
That's really frustrating.
I thought it was fascinating that you ran into the person who had asked his wife before they
Yeah.
hired you.
Yeah.
Because you-
I've had that problem too.
Yeah.
I've had that exact, to work with the men, sometimes you're not allowed to because they're afraid. And that actually happened, that one.
Other questions?
Romance, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just interested in being of the generation when the boys did woodwork and the women did needlework, which I sucked. I wondered how many girls took the opportunity to do that when you did.
When I don't actually remember, I think I was very self-centered when I was in middle school. I sort of remember like everything that was happening around me, but I definitely wasn't it wasn't unusual, at least in my school. And I remember auto shop, there was like this cachet of like the girls taking auto shop. So it was definitely still male dominated, but there were enough girls doing it that it was cool. I also grew up in a fairly progressive town, a small college town very similar to Ithaca. So there was sort of, it was not unusual. Still male dominated, but not unusual for girls to do it. Did you take shopping?
I don't, nope, I think I predate.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the high school,
Was it-
progressive as it is now.
I had to take home ec, but I think the boys did too, but it wasn't really, I might have been able to, but it didn't show up on, I was all science, so I wish I had. It would have been fun.
I took home ec, and one of my big projects was sewing was not for me. Fiber art is not where it was at. And I made an apron, and the ties on it were like 5 inches long. I tell you something, subconsciously, I was like, I want to do a different type of homemaking.
I got my dress sewed by providing protection to this one girl.
I actually,
So strong in junior high school too. I was like, no, and I would put the dress on her desk when the teacher would go around. And then put that in front of me as if I was doing it. But
I actually have always liked sewing as much as I like building. And my mom is a seamstress and my dad is a carpenter, so he his favorites. But actually, when I got married, though, I sewed a Carhartt tuxedo jacket. I always bring it around.
Maria, can men take classes at Hammerstone or?
So we are offering some co-ed classes this summer. But no, our Carpentry for Women classes are exclusively for women. So it really is about creating this space where we don't have to worry about all of the hidden gender dynamics that, like, the men might do it to us. We also do it to ourselves as soon as there's a man in the room. And I've witnessed this. I teach a cider press making class, and it's not really carpentry, we're sort of assembling a cider press from a kit, and then on the second day we press cider. So I had a husband and wife team come and take that class. So that one is co-ed, and one of the tasks was to drill a hole, sort of challenging, drill a long hole through a big assembly of wood, and you had to drill really straight or you'd pop out the side. And the wife tried it first, and she did an okay job, not great, but okay. And then she handed the drill to the husband, and he did an okay job as well. Honestly, I think she did a better job the first time. And then he handed the drill back to her and said, would you like to do it again? And she said, no, I'll go pound nails. And so she sort of stepped back, exited from that situation where she could have improved and learned. And if he hadn't been there, she would have just done it. And this was after teaching the classes for women, and I was just so flabbergasted and so, like, I don't teach to men and women, so I didn't know what to say and I didn't do anything, and I still kick myself for not having a solution to that problem. So now as we go into teaching co-ed classes, I mean, that's The harder work is creating this environment, this mixed gender environment where we still create a safe space. That's much harder work. When you have a group of women, they all understand what the situation is and why we need these classes.
And they have no experience. You don't have the person, whenever I teach with Habitat for Humanity, the man always, oh yeah. And then the women are immediately like a little bit intimidated because they're worried they're gonna pale in comparison. So I'm really proactive. I go, so why don't you go over there? And then I'll take, and when I've taught women in Habitat for Humanity, and well, you remember, you were there that day, they'll take a skill saw and they're shaking. And Maria and I will stand behind them and hold them for their first cut. I mean, they're literally hands shaking. And then they'll make 3 cuts, and you should see them. They're just like, woohoo! You know, so I cut 2 2x6s. And they made it through on the 3rd cut, and there's just a transformation in their confidence. And it's so cool when they teach, when a woman is teaching them, they just feel, I feel like the dynamics are totally different. Not to denigrate men, there's nothing wrong. It's just a different dynamic that people than women are used to.
And every other situation in their lives, they've been told this is dangerous. And the hidden message is you shouldn't try. I have women come to my classes and they're like, my dad was great, we did all these projects, but anytime we did something like with cutting with the circular saw, anything harder or more dangerous, he would take it from my hand and say, this is hard, or this is dangerous. And so we internalize that and think, oh, if it's dangerous, I shouldn't be doing it.
Especially if they let the brother do it.
Right, exactly.
I was thinking, as one of you, formerly, you ought to, when thinking about it, we have to bring in a little bit of the social class dynamic, because my experience was similar, but my parents were upset to think that I would be a carpenter instead of something classier. In other words, it was too lower class.
Yeah.
And yet you all and I know that any good carpenter, male or female, is fairly well put together, because there's a lot of math, there's a lot of perceptual stuff that's important, there's the ability to really, grok the whole thing. And so it does take a fair amount of ability and maybe education. So that prejudice about social class is really unfortunate.
When I quit graduate school, my advisor said to me in a stuffy academic way, he said, oh, Maria, I certainly hope that you find something intellectually stimulating to do. And I'm pretty sure that what I'm doing now doesn't classify as really.
From his perspective.
From his perspective.
Yeah.
But I have never been as engaged and stimulated, and you encounter something new every single day on the job, and a good carpenter has the ability to solve those problems. Like, I never get something where I'm like, oh, well, I did this last Friday, and I know, like, I can just look up in my book. It's like, oh, I see similarities to things I've done before, and then you solve the problem. And that's what makes it, for me, it's like being outside and then always having a problem to solve. Sometimes I wish I had fewer problems to solve, but.
That is having fun, though,
Yeah.
is every day there's some new MacGyver thing, new thing like that you have to think your way through. Absolutely, I actually think that the spatial immersion in physical endeavor like this, where you put something together or take it apart. I'll never forget the first time I took a house apart, and it was just totally expansive in terms of cognitive capabilities in a way. We had this house on the lake. You might have been there, Sarah. I don't know if you were there. We took all the parts off the house, all the siding, everything we could, and we would run up to it with a sledgehammer and hit it to get it to fall, because we had all the structural, and we had it kind of lean in one way, and the thing wouldn't fall, and it wouldn't fall. And we kept smacking it, we were laughing our asses off. And we kept hitting, big hammer, we had big Scott hitting it, and it wouldn't go. And finally, we noticed there was a diagonal piece of siding still pinned, right? And it was this long. Knocked that thing off, smacked that building, the whole thing went down. And I remember just the cush kind of thing that I learned from the tearing apart of it. But because I didn't do it intellectually, I did it with my whole body, my brain and my hands and my whole body. There was a totally different learning that happened. And ever after that, anything I get into, I and that I will be able to figure it out. You know, like I can study nuclear quantum physics and just like get myself immersed in it and know that I can parse it apart and understand it if I break it into its smaller parts, right? And I didn't have that before. It's basic empowerment. And that's why I love what you're doing. Because more women that have that, okay, I'm gonna screw up and I'm gonna do it anyways. And I don't care. I'm just gonna drill that thing and yeah, maybe it's gonna go. And that's how play is, right? Play, we just go and get bruised and we get back up and we do it again. And we've all been, there's something about the way we were raised where the boys are like, that's fine for you to get all dirty and screw up and get blood on your face and a little bit of snot and still be okay. But with girls, it's like, that's not okay, that's dangerous. It's that's dangerous for you, but not for them.
You fail the first time, you're not.
No, you're
sure,
like,
yeah.
I can't do it again because now failure has some greater significance for women or something. And there's so much of it in what we do that you get over it.
Yeah, I stopped doing sculpture for 2 years, and when I was working on the barn, and then I realized one day, oh, this is sculpture. Oh, it's on a larger scale, you know, putting in walls or following the bed layout and all that. So it's pretty amazing that way. And I too tore down one of my father's best advice to me was tearing down a barn, which was going over anyway. Went to the neighbor and bought it for $125. $125, and the beams in that barn were just incredible. But it was going over, so I dismantled it so that deconstruction, as you were saying, Sue, is just as valuable a learning experience as the construction.
And we've taken away the body to education. People don't go to, they don't physically engage.
Education, right?
Yeah, physical engagement, I think, is, especially for girls, and that's why.
I think you're getting back to your comment about class and education, that was really interesting. So all the women, myself included, working on my crew are highly educated. And I think that when we get, it's like a conscious decision on the part of women to go into this work. And I believe that you have to be really smart, especially with all the building science that goes into modern construction. So in a way, and like you were saying, like a lot of the physical aspects with all the pneumatic tools and the mechanical assist, like there's not the same physical advantage to being a big burly dude. There's really an advantage to having educated people, educated women on your crew. You've got a lot of really smart people. Yeah.
I'd hire women in a second for my remodeling company because keep the.
So nobody even applies to your?
No, I don't hardly ever get women coming.
That's amazing.
And when I do get women, they try it for a little while, but then it's still, although we have new stuff to help with the physicality, you're on your feet, you're climbing ladders, it's still got a lot of physical. And then the other thing is, half of what we do is 8 foot off the ground. You've got to be okay with you got to walk up that ladder, you got to jump on the roof. And if you can't feel comfortable, and I know that they could get that comfort after a while, and I'm going to let Maria do that and then send them to me.
Well, you both ever thought of going to like the high schools, you know, and talking to them about?
Having your presentation.
Yeah, like right there and just saying.
I've been invited for career day before.
And how does it work? Do they, females, or do they get
Well, one day I did a
excited?
career day at T-Burg, and I was there with my framing square and saws and hammer and nail bag, and a helicopter flew into the courtyard, and I said, well, that's hard to follow. It was an Army helicopter they were recruiting, and we just went and played in the helicopter, because, you know, framing square is pale in comparison. But it didn't, I mean,
So
it isn't a great, it isn't that compelling anymore. I mean, the union has gone down in workers for men and women, and yeah, it's just not that attractive. I guess because of the pay. Our industry has not increased wages since like 85.
Well, in the federal wage, when we were doing Peggy's house, was $2 an hour.
When was that? What year? was
This
that?
is 1975.
Oh,
$2 an hour.
What I was going to just add to that, and I don't know how much it's changed in relation because of what you just said, but when I started doing carpentry, one thing that went through my mind was entry-level crappy job for a woman pays less than an entry-level crappy job for a man in construction. So there was a minor economic incentive to do that instead of trying to be a typist at Cornell.
That's
And I did drop out of graduate school like you, and I enjoyed working outside and being physical. I was really looking to do something instead of study. And, but that was a partial incentive, the fact that I would earn more money at that time anyway.
Yeah, but it's not true anymore.
No?
Yeah.
Well, not for carpentry, but still the non-traditional trades for women, sort of blue-collar work. I'm sorry, yeah, the non-traditional blue-collar work, men's entry-level positions still pay more than women's entry-level positions. So childcare and healthcare and all of that, those are lower paying. So getting women into these jobs that are paying is a benefit to low-income women. What happens often though is that once these positions get seen as women's work, the wages drop.
Look at veterinary medicine.
Yep.
Even that used to be very high paying, and then there were too many women, so it went down to like.
Right, and even teaching used to
Absolutely.
be a male-dominated profession, and then they actually encouraged women to go into it so they could pay them less. So it's a whole, complicated web.
Yeah.
So Sue, a couple of times, I forget the phrase you used, a mind jam or whatever you used, but do you sometimes find yourselves, wait a minute, what am I going to say now? Because sometimes you want to send the image that we can do this just like a man, but sometimes you want to send the message, we approach this differently than men. And like your comment about you building community and building physical space, do you think you do that more as a woman?
Well, that's a great question. So I do remodeling differently than most men in that than a lot of male contractors, in that I really listen to my clients, and I get how what I'm about to remodel is about their quality of life, not about spatial. So I'll listen. Like I run interference on my clients' bad ideas because they're not thinking about how the space is going to actually impact their quality of life. The other day, one of my clients sent me a thing. This isn't a very good example. Let me see if I can think of a good one. I bring to bear all the stuff I've learned. Like people say to me, build a shower, and they'll say, they'll think that they need to have a curb into their shower, and I'll say, no, we can build you a curbless shower, aging in place aspects apply, and I'll just think about their quality of life. I'll increase window dimensions because I know what they're that they're talking about light and volume that they ultimately want. And I don't just build spaces, I build spaces, and that's very kind of female oriented in that I'm listening to the human and it's not about the object, right? And the only way that I've been able to mitigate the knee-jerk reaction that I don't know what I'm doing, which is sad, but it's definitely always there, is that I've been doing it long enough that I've got a whole bunch of progeny on the ground. Bottom line, I've got references, I've got a very large client base, I can take them to jobs, and show them, they can go, oh yeah, she really built this, okay, it's okay. and then I impart bring to bear the very focused attention on them as people and what their lives would like to be like after it's remodeled. So those two things come together, and I can, but if I didn't have all that projects done, it's tough road because they're not buying it.
And that's the struggle that I've had,
Yeah.
as someone trying to break into it, is that I don't have that background, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle, because if people don't hire you because they don't see that volume of work, then you're not building that volume of work. And I have male colleagues who I started at the same time as, who have very successful building careers. I still feel like I'm struggling.
Yeah, we should talk.
People need to know that women do things differently, and I'd like to go back to what you were saying, because a building comes to mind. I was involved in building from the ground up with Rhoda Litton's dome in Enfield, and one thing that I understood about that, and Rhoda's here with us so she can correct me, is that Rhoda had contractors lined up, so she thought, to build this. Now, this is a geodesic dome, very unusual. And
In
the contractors-
1971.
And the contractors kept bailing on it.
Mhm.
They didn't want to touch touch it, I don't think, or that's what we surmised, because it was untraditional, it was unconventional. Male contractors out there, what the hell do you do with a circle? What's a circle? No, really. And so Rhoda had to put together what she called, what we ended up calling ourselves, a lightweight crew, which was Rhoda, myself, her cousin Bernal, who was this little guy, and then Russell Rumsey, who laid block. Jared Rumsey from Cornell. And so we were the lightweight crew, and we did the dome, because other contractors didn't know how to do this. And one day the NISAC guy was coming up and checking the lines and all of this, and he looked at that foundation and he says, "Where'd you get the round block?" I don't know, I think it was either Bernal or someone said, Jared said, "Rhoda bends them." I mean, it's not like you're saying, it's kind of, it's like, well, how do you lay out to make a circle? How would you organize blocks? They can create a circle. So,
Monica.
Yeah, I have a question. I wanted to pick up on something, Sue, that you said that's related to Maria. I think we got cut off, or else I didn't really hear the answer, because I think you started to say that you would love to be hired more women, like, because, and you were like about to say, like, what's different? Is it different? Is it just because you want to support women in the trades? And then you were kind of saying that's why you like what Maria's doing, because you want more.
Well, I like what Maria's doing partially because I like more interesting, empowered women on the planet to have as playmates. But the way that I think women would be better to be work on my modeling company is just the focus on the customer. The cleanup at the end of the day, the level of communication, and there's just things that I know they're coming home at about 4, and I've got a bunch of crap in the driveway. Let's clean that up a little bit, and being really conscientious about the fact that we're in somebody else's home. And I think part of the reason I aborted my speaking was it was about to, no, it's fine, it was about to become semi-discriminatory. Because I was about to say, because women are a lot more clean. And it's not.
they are.
Well, they are, but it's
we
also,
are.
yeah, it's the conscientiousness that there's some, I just feel like women know that the customer is living here. And we should really keep that somewhat uppermost in our minds. And construction is important, but we also got to remember that it's not our house that we're working on. And I know other builders in the area because I do speak at industry conferences, and they just love hiring women to be their lead carpenters. Yeah. I know one guy in Massachusetts in I forget, Newton, Massachusetts, and he's got like 3 crews that a woman is the lead foreman on the job. And I'm sorry, it doesn't sound like that, whatever, 4-person. And he just loves it. And I lament that there aren't anybody that really wants to see it. It's a grind. I mean, it's like anything though, but it is a grind. And I have to say, you're not doing much at the end of the day. I mean, if you've done a day of framing, you're kind of done. I mean, you're tired. You're pooped.
Well, there's tedium.
Yeah.
There's the need to be patient, which I feel like women are often better at. There's the fact that needs to be follow through. When someone who's a more impulsive, maybe less mature, would say, "Oh, the hell with that," and leave. But to really do the job right, you have to follow through with some details that are just tedious, boring, annoying, frustrating. And I kept on getting, as I worked in that field, feedback from men like, "Well, we'll let Sally take it, because she'll make sure it gets done."
You're like raising kids.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well, we keep other people in our minds better. I think we keep the other human.
Yeah.
Like just the other day, I had painting inside the house, and all my guys were outside, and I was doing the detail stuff. And I had to go to an appointment, and I remembered I left the blue tape, and it was about to be the weekend. And I went like, oh shoot, 2 days with a bunch of blue tape sitting there in your sunroom that we had just built, you know? And I called my guys up and I said, make sure that blue tape, you can take all the tape off that I put on but before you leave. And I know that they would never even occur to them
Right.
to think, because when it's the weekend, I like to make my projects feel like we're not in your house anymore. So you get your house back for the weekend. We take it over during the week, yeah, I got that. But on the weekend, I try to give it, especially when it's towards the end of complete, you know. And I think about the fact that there's 2 full days, and they love their new space. I mean, they're so ecstatic. And I want them to enjoy it and not have our crap sitting around. So, yeah, that's one of those ways that it is.
I just wanted to comment on this, the comment about tedium though. I mean, every job that I've ever worked in has had very tedious aspects. And you sort of imagine, oh, if you're a carpenter or woodworker, you're going to spend all this time sanding, doing really boring stuff. But when I was a computer programmer, even in graduate school, it was a lot of very tedious work. So I just think that comes up in any job. And at least when you're a carpenter, there's sort of the physical aspect to it, which can relieve the mental tedium, or you're doing something very physical and repetitive. It gives you time to think. So that's what I was true.
We'll take a couple more questions and then start to wrap up. Go ahead.
I just want to say that I tried it, and you guys rock. And you are exceptional. I don't think you should try to pretend you're not, because it is hard work. Like, physically, I think I was also encouraged to give up as being a girl, but I did give up because it was wicked. So, yeah.
Well, and after a time, you know, like Sally Wetzel's, I'm sort of interested in what women do afterwards. I mean, after I finished 12 years of carpentry, I went into teaching art history in TC3. So all that, and Sally, you became ESL.
I became an adult ESL.
And Cindy
certified
became
teacher
a midwife.
And a program coordinator. So I did it full-time.
And Cindy became a midwife.
Yeah.
Mary Shelley, an architect.
Yeah.
She's doing the work.
Mary Shelley's still doing her woodwork or craftsman,
Yeah.
but not her carpentry, after building a house and all, so.
Yeah, I think it'd be really hard to keep it up. The way, especially as physical as it used to be, you're saying that it's a little easier now.
And I've heard there's a lot of drugs in the trade because it is so hard on your body. I can't imagine. I can imagine a lot of Oxycontin happening in some of the trades because it's hard on your body.
Yeah.
Well, it's not another thing. I'm interested in this concept of community, and all of you, I think, one way or the other, have touched on it, because it appears to me that each of you, the projects that you've been involved in have put you in relation to the people you're working with in a lasting kind of relationship. You know, it goes on. You don't forget it. But this concept that you were talking about with community, I don't quite get that. What is that in relation to your building the houses and so forth? We know that there are many kinds of communities around here, Echo Village, for example, and others. And we know the Quaker communities, Shaker communities, and so forth. But what, just in a few words, what can you say what you are thinking about when you use that word, you're building communities?
So it segues nicely from what you guys were just talking about, because it's sort of what I'm doing next, and that's becoming a real estate developer. I want to call it that. That's a catch-all. So very much like co-housing is what I'm creating. I built the Aurora Pocket neighborhood, which is actually a cooperative. So that's community almost by legal model. The next project I'm doing won't necessarily be a cooperative, but it's going to have a very intentional community component, which basically means I've arranged the houses physically around a common courtyard. So they all look out on a space that has no roads in it. And I'm going to have a community garden in it, a community pavilion, place for people to gather and eat together and hang out and do gardening together, and a place to play can jam and drink beers too, hopefully, and just play together. It's a big, and those are all arranged physically, and all the public spaces of the houses look out on that space to foster spontaneous interaction. And then on my website, I've created a domain where people can actually get to know each other. called Amabel Connection. The name of the community is Amabel, which is named after the people that owned the site for 3 generations, and I explained that. So we'll be creating an opportunity for people to, by virtue of putting up sort of their profile or their core values and some pictures, get to know each other prior to purchasing. And then, of course, that'll foster relatedness right away, because they'll be able to find out what matters to each individual, you know, and maybe see what the picture of their kids and their dog and the various things that matter to them through the evocative questions that I have on there. And then we'll meet physically prior to people moving in, and then by time people move in, they'll know each other, and we will have made decisions of like, are we going to have chickens? What are we going to grow in the community garden? What's our car share calendar going to look like? Who wants to build a root cellar? Things like that will be already kind of bandied about, and then that'll cause connection. And then when everybody moves in, even before they move in, we'll have physical gatherings where we all get to hang out together. And it's creating, and then my houses are net zero. So the houses produce as much energy as they use. And so the community, by definition, is about environmental consciousness as well as social connectivity. It's got those dual kind of purposes or missions associated with it. So it's going to self-select. I mean, you're not going to go there unless you actually are interested in reducing your vehicle miles traveled and reducing your carbon footprint. So
it's on 5 Mile Drive across from the Catholic Cemetery. When might we start to see construction?
The town doesn't let me apply for building permits until I get my road and my water, as you well know.
I know.
Tragically.
I'm on the town board.
Which sucks, because I'd like to start building before the water goes in, but they don't let you do that. So it's going to take me about a year to put all the infrastructure in. Next year we'll start building. But I'm going to sell the houses. They're going to start selling in 3 months.
So go to that website.
So yeah,
How big of a community is this going to take?
30 houses. Yeah.
We'll take one more question, then I'm hoping that you all can stay for a few minutes. Oh, was there another question?
I had one
We'll take 2 more questions. Go ahead, Tim.
I had noticed that most of the male-dominated businesses and stuff, there's usually a great women behind them. That was doing the real business part that the guys couldn't do. So it always seemed natural that they'd see the guys doing it, and they'd be doing all everything that makes it successful, and see you doing it and go, I can do that. You know, and do it yourself, because you're doing the end that's making them look good all the time. So this seemed like a natural progression for women to get into this.
I have to say, for the men running those businesses, it is nice to have a wife, you know, doing the bookkeeping. You have to do it all yourself. It's just like you're doing both parts.
Only had a wife.
Yeah.
My wife is good.
I was wondering, for a younger woman looking to get into the trades, if you would be willing to share your opinion or explain the difference between approaching a local company and learning from the ground up as a laborer and getting skills that way, as opposed to joining a local union and doing an apprenticeship that leads to being a journeyman carpenter.
Do you have much experience with unions? I've hired union guys, and the apprenticeship program I think is really good.
But the union work is big stuff.
It's very different.
And
Work
their
is different
experiences
than what we
with
do.
homes, renovations, it's a very different world.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, it does, I mean, the very first thing that we have to train people when we first hire them is how to read a tape. It's kind of rocket science reading a tape. It's amazing. You know, what is a 16th and what, you know, like that. And then you get that in the apprentice program. You can also become facile with running tools and things like that. And that's a great program. You're going to see a lot more discrimination, and you're going to tie a lot of wire. In other words, it's a lot of concrete work. So you're going to tie a lot of rebar.
Even
That's
though you're
what
called a carpenter.
Yeah, in the carpenters union, you're tying rebar. But it still is, I mean, if you were to come to me and say, I went through the apprenticeship program, I'd be more interested in you than somebody who didn't.
And the other good thing about the apprenticeship program is they have like government mandates to get women into those spots. And so even though you might face like day-to-day discrimination from your peers, like there's sort of these funnels that are trying to get, whether or not the higher up in the organization is actually doing it in the right manner, that's a good question. But there are spots, and you will, one of the hard things in the unions is like getting the work to move up to the next level. And so as a woman, that you will always be able to get work because they need to fill those quotas.
But they always end up electricians. Which, yeah, a lot of the women will go in and because in the union, I bet in terms of physicalness, it's probably even more arduous than in residential remodeling, because you're pumping a lot of rock around and that kind of thing. And
There's
and
more
you start-
variety in what you do.
They don't have nearly the variety, no. But it does teach you how to work hard. And then a lot of times they go into they become electricians, it seems like. It's a little bit less hard physically.
And feel free to follow up. We're going to have a break, but hopefully you all can stay so you can do some follow-up if any of you have questions. I just want to say I like the fact that there's this thread of history in the room of people who know each other, and it goes back 30, 40 years, whatever, so I like that. I believe there's some material about Hammerstone over on the table there. We know that Deborah is selling her book. If you don't have a copy of the book, I think she's giving some proceeds to the History Center.
25%, $10 out
Thank
of
you,
40
thank
goes to
you.
the History Center.
And
Also,
do go and
the
look
first-
at the website for New Earth Living to get more information about Amabel. I'm sorry, what was you saying, Deborah?
Oh, for the first number of people who buy them? You get a little stand.
Oh, there you go. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Deborah.